because of disenchantment, we no longer see. And so what reenchantment, the hope of reenchanting, is doing is that we would learn to see and enjoy the things around us as gift, and then enjoy them in creaturely response. That's the idea of reenchanting.
Hey everybody, Mike Erre here. Welcome to the Vox Podcast. So glad you are tuning in. And today, the guest of all guests. Oh my goodness. Now it's not every day you get to interview one of your best friends ever in the world for a podcast. I get to interview Dr. Paul Gould, affectionately known as Gouldy to those of us who grew up together. Paul and I, so he is a professor of philosophy, he's PhD from Purdue, a big freaking deal, which he always reminds me about. And Paul and I met, what was our first week, freshman year in college?
Yes, yep.
And then we lived in the same dorm, and then the last 2 years of college, we lived in the same house, and he's just been an amazing, amazing friend. But it's tough not to make fun of each other. And so I'm here with Dr. Gould. When I call him Dr. Gould, I kind of smile. Dr. Gould, say hello to the Vox audience.
Yes. Well, hello, everyone. And Mike, it's so great to be. I'm having a hard time, keeping a straight face just listening to you, but it's great to be here.
I mean, Paul and I, so I'll try to limit the inside jokes. And I mean, it's just so fun to be with you today.
So good.
Yes. So Paul, besides just him being awesome and a dear friend, he's written a book called Cultural Apologetics that you've been working on for quite a while. And it's coming out the day after this will be released, right? March 12th.
That's right.
And which is 10 days before my birthday, so thank you for that.
Well, it's all about you, Mike. So
yeah, it is. You know what? And in fact, well, we'll get to the mention of me in a second. So Paul, I just have a couple general sort of observations about the book. You quote. I mean, you're a veritable quote machine. I mean, you're quoting just the entire world. You've got some C.S. Lewis quotes. You've got some Augustine quotes, Dallas Willard, Aristotle. You throw John Cougar Mellencamp in there, St. Thomas Aquinas, and then into that esteemed company, on page 150, you quote yourself. So can you just tell us a little bit about why it was that you're the only one that has ever said that better than everybody else on page 150?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was actually thinking of quoting you, Mike, but I didn't want to prop up your ego so much. So I just read that, and I actually, it was funny. Somebody tweeted out the quote that you're talking about on 150. I said, where did I say that? That's really good. And
yeah, exactly. So as I've written elsewhere, he says, and then he quotes himself and footnotes himself.
I always wanted to say that, I've dealt with this elsewhere, so it's just an easy way to,
So that was awesome. Way to drive book sales to the previous book.
Yep.
And congratulations. Yep. This is number 2, right? But you've edited and participated in others.
It's number 10 actually, Mike, but
Okay. Editing a book does not count.
That's true. So it is number 2 that I've written myself.
Yeah, I'm saying, and I've written, I don't know, let me think, 5.
Nice.
So a doctor isn't everything, Pally. All right, as I read the book, I found it interesting that there was no mention of streaking. And that seems incredibly relevant to the topic at hand. Do you want to explain that absence?
Yeah, well, let's think about this. So I'm trying to think, Mike, how much you want me to share here about our freshman year in college. But
how cold was it?
I believe it was winter, right?
Oh, it was winter.
And it was late at night.
It was about 3 a.m.
Yeah. No, that didn't make the cut. I think we had to cut it out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because the
that
subtitle
was under the foolishness of the world, I think.
The subtitle of the book is Renewing the Christian Voice, Conscience, and Imagination. So I consider streaking to be part of renewing the Christian imagination. So I just was wondering why it wasn't there. Congratulations on being Jewish.
Yeah,
I
thanks.
had no idea.
Either did I. Yeah, that was a fun story.
Yeah. So anyway, way
Yep.
to like be of God's chosen people, man.
Do you want me to tell that story so people know what we're talking about, or
Nope.
just
Nope. Just
okay?
congratulate. Hey,
Thanks.
we're driving them to the book.
Okay, well, it explains why I look the way I look, but that doesn't help your listeners. But yes, I am Jewish and hairy, so now I understand a little bit about why.
What was the best Pearl Jam concert you've ever been to?
Oh yeah, that's interesting that you bring that up, Mike. The only one I've been to, the one that I went to with you,
Yes.
while we were in seminary,
Yes. Yes.
together. Yeah, so it's fun. Our lives intersect. Obviously we met as 18-year-olds in college.
Very mature
And then
18-year-olds.
They immature 18-year-olds, and they re-intersect years later in Los Angeles. Both of us going to seminary, and of course, one of your great loves in college was 1990s grunge bands, and so. You got into Nirvana and Pearl Jam, and so I figured, hey, I might as well, have the experience.
Let's do it.
Here in LA. So good memories. It
You're welcome. Now,
was part of my sanctifying process in seminary. So I was good to do that with you.
oh, Goldie, it's so fun. So those were serious questions. Now let's get to the really serious questions. So, one of the things about Paul and I, so our faith really developed both in college. We were part of a college organization of students, and we participated in something called apologetics, and we learned it, we did it. That brought us to LA to get masters in philosophy. And apologetics, of course, was the sort of rational defense of the Christian faith, answering big questions like, hey, how can you trust the Bible, and so on. But here you're talking about something called cultural apologetics, right? And so what's the difference? Because you and I, the first question is, would you agree that the questions that people are asking are very, very different 30 years later than they were asking? I can't believe it's 30 years or 20 years.
Yeah,
is it 20?
I don't know. It was in 1993, right?
Yeah. So that's 10 years. So 10 years ago.
You were never so good at math. So,
so how have you seen this? Because the word apologetics almost isn't used or understood anymore.
Yeah.
In the Christian world. So what are you meaning by it? How have the questions changed? And then how is what you're doing different?
Yeah. So you're right. Apologetics is a word that in a lot of corners, it's not even a positive word.
Right.
But the idea, at least historically, apologetics is just giving a defense for the faith. So it would be offering evidence, reasons to believe. It would be responding to obstacles to the faith and things like that. But what's been interesting over the last, actually probably since the early 2000s, and I think a lot of this has to do with the so-called new atheists, which are folks like Richard Dawkins, and who wrote a book called The God Delusion, or Christopher Hitchens. You might have heard some of these names.
Yep, Sam Harris.
Yeah, and so they're not offering anything new in terms of arguments, but their rhetoric is basically ratcheting up. And one of the consistent claims that they're making is that this God that we worship, the God of the Bible, is a moral monster, or Christianity is evil, or religion in general poisons everything. That was the subtitle of Christopher Hitchens' book. And so I began to notice probably over the last, 10, 15 years, that the objections are shifting. And largely because I think to some of the things the new atheists were bringing up, questions about the goodness of Christianity, questions about, is Christianity good for the world? Is Jesus really relevant? And so cultural apologetics, of course, we care about the mind. And so you have to continue to give reasons for faith. And we want to argue for the reasonableness of Christianity. But what I'm realizing is that there's also objections and is basically reestablishing the Christian voice, the Christian conscience, and the Christian imagination, so that Christianity will be viewed as true. So that still matters, truth matters, but also desirable, that is good and beautiful as well.
Yeah, no, I've noticed that. As well. The argument's almost being a Christian makes you a worse person.
Yeah.
Which, is ironic given the greatest arguments for it in the early church weren't the intellectual arguments. It was just the lives of the the people who adhered to the teachings of Jesus, which is a fascinating thing. So you cut out just a little bit. You were saying it's not just that we want to see Christianity as true. We want to see Christianity as desirable, as good for the world, as promoting human flourishing, correct?
That's right. Yeah. So the idea is that it's not just true to the way the world is, but it's true to the way that the world ought to be, right? That we have all these longings and these desires for love and justice and beauty and meaning and goodness. And Christianity satisfies all of those too. And that's the piece that I think we, as apologists or in apologetics, we don't tend to focus on that, but that's just as important because it gets to the desires of the human heart as well. So, and I think that's so important today.
There also seems to be within the church, and by church I mean the capital C collection of all believers. Yeah. There seems to be a growing realization, and so this could be a partial objection to your project, that Jesus doesn't really meet the longings in the way that often we talk about. You know, there's this whole, like, there's a big hole in your heart, and Jesus comes to fill it. And when you are with him and you've given your life to him, then, you know, your needs are met, your longings are fulfilled. And a huge part of the audience for this podcast and many others is the idea that, well, we've given that a try and it just hasn't worked. Like we believe, and yet we're still longing, we're still empty, we're still looking for significance. Yeah. And so sidestep just for a second into that world, because that's the world of a lot of our audience. Is we call it kind of deconstructing their faith. Yep. So how do we claim that Jesus can fulfill our longings when so many Christians still experience the longings, you know, that we say that Jesus fills? How would you just a couple of thoughts on that?
Okay. Yeah. Let me give two thoughts. That's a great question. The first thing, think about the set of all of our longings, all of our desires, like an inverted triangle. So at the top, you have, let's just call it our surface desires. And then as you dig down to the bottom, you know, you have your deeper desires. And then right at the bottom, I believe you have our deepest desire. And at the surface, it would be things like, you know, I love Twinkies or something.
You do.
Or, you know,
You do.
I do. You know that about me. Or I like, you know, I want a car or whatever, or like a specific car. But then as you dig deeper, you know, the deeper you go, you start to get to natural desires, things like our longing for justice or for love or for beauty. And then right at the bottom, you have your deepest desire, which is this longing for God. And so I love how Augustine, who's this ancient church father, he said that our hearts are restless until they find our rest in him. And so I think that that's a helpful way to think about desires.
Right.
And then the second thing, though, now I'm going to switch gears, and I'm ultimately, I think, going to try to get to answer your question. Think of, okay, so in this life, you know, we begin with human nature as it is, you know, fallen, corrupt, bent. Our hearts are bent. Our desires are in the wrong directions. And then we have this picture of human nature as it ought to be, right? You know, this vision of the good life, and Christ would be the perfect picture of that. And then this idea of man is on a journey toward that end or purpose or telos. And in between human nature as it is and human nature as it ought to be, we're on this quest, and that quest requires that we would develop the certain kind of virtues to be a certain kind of person. And so you have the classic virtues like courage and wisdom and justice and temperance. And then you have the theological virtues of faith, hope, and love. So here's the interesting thing about that. And I'm going to try to get to your question.
No.
One of those virtues,
keep going, buddy.
Hope, is a virtue that we actually won't take with us in heaven. This is really interesting because hope, again, is a distinctly Christian or theological virtue, but it's the idea that one day all of our longings will be fully satisfied. That one day every deep desire of the heart will find its expression in the kingdom of God. And so to that really good question, part of that is understanding that we're on a quest toward our highest good, which is union with God, and everything that comes with that, eternal life, the kingdom of God, you know, the resurrection of the body and all that, you know. So there will be a day, not in this world, There will be a day when hope won't be needed because all those will be satisfied. But until then, we live with hope. And that's the beauty of the Christian story, is that we can actually have hope even when we live in this world where all of our desires aren't ultimately fulfilled like we'd like them.
So
does that help a little bit?
It does. So what would you say are those core, when you drill down all the way, what are the core longings?
I love what C.S. Lewis said. It's in the chapter on hope in his book, Mere Christianity. He said, if you find within yourself desires that nothing in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world.
Yeah.
And when he says that, throughout his works, he references a number of things that can't be fully satisfied, although we have tastes or glimpses of them in this world. And they would be things that we philosophers might call transcendentals: goodness, truth, and beauty. I think love, justice, all of those are just above that deepest desire. And in fact, Lewis, in his chapter on heaven, in another book called The Problem of Pain, he talks about all of those as the things that you get when you get union with God for eternity. So I'm thinking of those kinds of things that we all long for, but ultimately they won't be fully, embraced until we're with Jesus for eternity.
So part of the work or the project of this cultural engagement is the recognition that behind all of the superficial stuff and artifacts of culture, there are these universal sort of human longings.
Good.
And I'm just
good, Mike. Come on.
Thank you, Paul. And so part of the project, in terms of helping people, the way I say is help people see the beauty of Jesus. And that exactly right is the reimagining or the renewing of conscience and imagination and so on. But that project is difficult when you're not a student of culture, right? So if you're just going into Christian school, living in a Christian, dorm or whatever it is, and nothing wrong at all with those things, but it's you're not talking about building Christian silos. And running parallel universes. You're talking about getting to know the culture and understanding its longings and so on. But I'm trying to get to this question. That was a very long introduction. The thing that most resonated with me is this concept of disenchantment and the concept of reenchantment. So I want to spend a little time talking about part of the malaise of our world. Is something called disenchantment. And so could you talk a little bit about what that is?
Yeah. So, I think that kind of the first step in a cultural apologetics is understanding the culture that we find ourselves in. And so that's one of the big ideas in the book, is that we live in a disenchanted world.
Yes.
So what I mean by that is that our dominant way of perceiving is disenchanted. In other words, we no longer see the world in its proper light. So we use words like this to describe our world. We say that it's mundane, or it's ordinary, or it's everyday.
Boring.
But that's not the way the world is, right? If you think about it, biblically, the world is deeply mysterious. It's beautiful. It's to use the proper word, it's sacred, or it's gift. And so the world actually isn't disenchanted, but the dominant way of perceiving the world is this idea of disenchantment. So it's been emptied of its magic. It's been emptied of the divine or the transcendent, we might say. And so everything is, this low and leaden sky, and that's all there is to the world. And that affects everyone. It doesn't just affect those out there in culture. One of the big ideas is that, it affects those of us in the church too, that we're largely disenchanted, and that we need to I call it rebaptize, but we need to reimagine a deep beauty and deep, a sacred world that's gift, and to begin to see the world the way that Jesus actually sees and delights in the world.
Yeah, for sure. But the idea, so this about me, and I'm weird, for sure. Yes. But I found, like, from a very, very young age, I was always drawn, like the Star Wars scene where Luke is kind of looking at the twin suns with the longing, and the music kicks up. Like that's one of the earliest things I ever got in touch with as a kid about wanting life to be different, wanting life to be better, wanting life to be more epic. You know, and so the idea of disenchantment really resonates. And what do you think? You know, what has caused this? I mean, certainly our scientific understanding is increased, so that seems to decrease the magic. But many would argue that's a good thing, right? So what do you identify as the reasons the world has been emptied?
Yeah, I mean, that's a complicated question. It's a great question. There are philosophical stories that you could give, and I kind of unpack some of that in the book. But the way that to try to give it a simple answer, though, the ancients viewed reality in terms of a story, and it was a story that begins with God, and then there's a wandering away from God, and then there's kind of a turning back to God. And they actually thought that was the way that reality was structured. So like, for example, think of Genesis 1, you know, in the beginning, there was God, perfect unity, the triune God existing, you know, in a perfect loving relationship. And that love bubbles out into this creation of a good world, you know, with multiplicity and diversity and gift and being. And then you get to verse 26 of Genesis 1, and you have kind of the hinge, you know, suddenly there's this creature created in the divine likeness, humans. And in many ways, we're the hinge that is created in the image of God to be kings and queens. That's why I love Lewis and Narnia, you know, that we're kings and queens of this world, and we're priests and priestess. And our job is to basically re-gift all this diversity and multiplicity and beauty and life back to God as priests and priestesses and kings and queens of the world. And what was your original question? I just got into the gospel story.
No, it's awesome. What has caused the world to be so disenchanted?
Okay, good. Sorry, I got a little
no, dude.
Genesis
Preach.
Yeah, and so I think So ultimately, you know, as we put our theology hats on, you could think about the fall and what happened there. But ultimately, I think it has to do with this idea in Romans 1 of suppressing the truth about God as kind of the first step toward disenchantment. And then and really, as I love this quote in A.W. Tozer's book, The Knowledge of the Holy, it's the first sentence where he says, you know, the most important thing about you is what comes to mind when you think about God. And then he says, if you get that wrong, everything else goes wrong from there. It's all wrong downhill. And in many ways, I think that's where it began for us, is when we get God wrong, we begin to empty the world of its transcendence or its beauty or its majesty. And so we end in this secular, or I prefer the word disenchanted world that is emptied of the divine and things like that. So yeah, there's lots of factors. Again, I'll point you to the book for some of the philosophical ideas, but ultimately, on a spiritual level, I think it begins with, you know, this idea of emptying our world of a view of who God is, and then emptying the world of her majesty.
Yeah, and it causes, you know, you write it causes the felt absence of God, just kind of an apathy towards spiritual things. That and tell the story about when you teach and you give reasons for the existence of God, and people yawn.
Yeah. This is something interesting. Just in my own observations, I was, as a grad student in my PhD at Purdue University, one of the joys of being in a doctoral program is you get to teach. And so I was teaching intro to philosophy classes to undergrads there. And I'd spend, 6 weeks giving the classic arguments for God. And as well as the classic argument against God, namely the problem of evil and some other variants of that. And what struck me was almost every semester, students would move from unbelief or, you know, agnosticism to belief in deity, to belief in God, because of the strength of the arguments. And of course, I believe that they're very strong, the cosmological, the teleological, all these classic arguments. But what was really interesting, at the same time, they'd be like, cool, God exists. All right, ask the beer and pizza. You know, let's get on to my life. And it's like they would add this this entity to the furniture of the world, but they wouldn't connect it to the relevancy of their own lives. And that's the kind of idea that, we live in this world that we can imagine our lives as meaningful without any appeal to transcendence. Right. So even when we fit God back in, he's kind of like a genie in the bottle. And of course that, there's studies and after study that show how that's a problem with our church, with our youth in the church,
right,
and so on. So,
well, and the idea. So I want to camp here just a little, because this idea to me is so relevant to Christians who are disenchanted with Christianity, so of course we lived, and I'm offering a very, very simplistic explanation. When we didn't understand weather patterns, there were gods and goddesses, and we didn't, right. When we didn't understand space and gravity and all those sorts of things. So in one sense, losing the magical view of the world is a good thing. Right. But in another sense, it's because what I'm missing, what people seem to be missing, is they have all the appropriate furniture, they have the correct theology, they've been raised in the church community, and so what I'm doing is I'm taking something that you're talking about, those who are pre-Christians or they're not yet in the kingdom. I want to apply it to like people who are in Christianity, because I see this disenchantment all over the place in the church.
Right.
And so the idea that there's this felt absence of God as a symptom of disenchantment, I thought was incredible. I was like, oh my goodness, that's it. That's what a lot of Christians are feeling. Right. But you also say that there are two other things that describe culture today, Western culture today. So we're disenchanted, yes. And then there are two other things you mentioned. I'd love for you to go into those two.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm trying to do a little cultural analysis in the book, and just to back up a little, there's a missionary named Leslie Newbegin who wrote a book. He went off to India in the early 20th century to be a missionary, sent from Great Britain. He spends 40 years in India, comes back to his sending country, Great Britain, realizes that his own country has become post-Christian, as he calls it, in the time that he's gone. And he realizes that he needs to have a missionary encounter with his own culture in the West. And so he writes a little book in the 70s called The Foolishness to the Greeks. And in that, on the first page, he asks this question. He says, what would be involved in a genuine missionary encounter between the gospel and then he says this, the whole way of living, perceiving, and thinking that we call modern Western culture. And so in the book, I use those three words. What's the culture's dominant way of living, dominant way of perceiving, and dominant way of thinking in our culture to kind of understand it? And so I've already mentioned our dominant way of perceiving, which is disenchanted. The other two then, what is our culture's dominant way of thinking? The word I use there is sensate. And what that means is that we're focused on the sensory. We're focused on the material. And so I love, sorry, I do pull a lot from C.S. Lewis, but I love in his book, The Screw Tape Letters, the very first letter, you have senior devil to junior devil. And he says this, he says, it's your business to fix their minds on the stream of experience. He says, don't awaken their rational faculties, because then they'll realize that they can win on their, the enemy's terms.
Right.
But he says, keep them focused on the stream of experience. And that describes our dominant mode of thinking, I think, in our culture.
Yep.
And then the last one, what is our dominant way of living? And the word that I use there is very simple. It's hedonism. And it's just this idea, again, no surprise, right? That we go from, one bite-sized packet of pleasure to another,
right.
And, never satisfied, but always seeking another episode. And so we become addicted to these little bite-sized packets of pleasure. So hedonism.
Where would you say in that three-word descriptor of human life, where does streaking fit in, would you say there?
Yeah, I knew some kind of question was coming. I think that's just good fun.
That's just good fun.
Right?
That's just good fun.
Memories.
So how, and the reason you quote Lewis so much, of course, is because he did this. And this cultural apologetics was his thing.
That's right.
He's par excellence, as we say in the philosophy world, or maybe not. Well, one of the things that's interesting when you talk about, having a genuine missionary encounter, there was a study that came out, and it was like 47% of millennials. And again, I mean, stats, dude, but it's an interesting conversation point. 47% of millennials agree that it is somewhat wrong to share your beliefs with another person in the hope that they change their way of believing to your way of believing. And have you heard of this?
I have.
And which is an interesting, so even the phrase "a genuine missionary encounter" would be objected to, right? That's some sort of imperialistic way of looking at things.
That's right.
So yeah, what would you say to somebody who
I would say let's switch our language. So think of Paul at Mars Hill. So this is Acts chapter 17. He arrives in Athens, and so he arrives at a culture different than his own. And so Christians today, we are counterculture to the dominant ways of thinking in many ways. So what did Paul do? Well, he boldly proclaims. He does three things. First, he identifies a starting point within his culture. So for him, it was all these altars to an unknown God. And then he builds a bridge from that starting point to Jesus and the gospel. And he does it brilliantly. I just invite you to look at Acts chapter 17. But then as you get to the end of the passage, he challenges them to repent of their old way of thought and to literally embrace a new way, that is the gospel. And so the language that I use in the book, partly what I'm doing, remember how I said earlier that the ancients viewed the world in terms of wander and return back to God?
Yep.
I think that the same could be true of culture. Like I explained the descriptive part, how we have wandered down to this sort of, how we have arrived at disenchantment. But part of the book is actually prescriptive, or at least hopeful, that we can join with God and the Holy Spirit to re-enchant the world. And the two steps that I talk about to get there are, number one, that we need to join with God to awaken these deep longings of the human heart. But then secondly is that we need to encourage people to return to reality. And so that would be the language I would push back then if people don't like the idea of a missionary encounter. Well, we need to invite people in love to return to reality. In other words, to locate their lives in the story that is actually the true story of the world, the only one that's alive and understands them and things like that. And so what I mean by that are two things, and then I'll stop. What I mean by returning to reality are, number one, and this begins with us, that we would begin to see and delight in the world the same way Jesus sees and delights in the world. And then secondly, invite others to see and delight in the world the same way Jesus does. So that would be maybe how I would want to push back gently on the worry.
Yeah, for sure. And that's an interesting invitation, to invite people to see the world and delight in it the way that Jesus did. That's
the re-enchanting.
Yeah. Now let's talk about that. So if it's been disenchanted, it can be re-enchanted, correct?
Yeah, we can hope. Yeah.
Well, and I find, and again, I'm so sorry to talk a bit, but this concept really wrecked me just personally, because I look at all of the ways that I try to re-enchant my world on my own.
Yeah.
So I love, and I don't know why, but I love there's a part, one of the Disney parks in Florida called Epcot, and they have this back row of like 11 different countries that are represented with authentic food and clothes and people there. And for some reason, I just absolutely find it enchanting. I really do. I love it, but it provokes some sort of weird melancholy in me. Yeah. When I'm there, it's this weird, like scratching of an itch, but then it makes it itchier.
That's right.
All at the same time. Or like the Harry Potter novels. I mean, I've read those, maybe 5 or 6 times. And I find myself, and those are just two really dumb sort of pop culture examples, but I find myself trying to, and I think about, like, I see people at Disneyland who are lifers. I mean, they are there as often as they can be. Why? Right? And it's what Disney's offering is the re-enchantment of the world.
That's right. Yeah. Oh,
Go
go ahead.
ahead.
Keep going.
No. I'm just setting you up for you to jump in at some point because well, no, just because it's so relevant to me. Like
Yeah.
I find myself so disenchanted with my Christian life, and I've been wrestling with how to re-enchant that. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? As a Christian, let alone as somebody who's just kind of wandering around in a sensate, hedonistic sort of mode of operation in this world.
Yeah. Let me say something that might sound a little controversial, but it's
Oh my
really not.
goodness. That has
And it's
never
not
happened.
my idea. So that way, it's Jamie K. Smith. He's written a lot on our longings and how they focus. But he said, and I've been thinking about this a lot. He said the only Christianities that will have a future are those that re-enchant themselves.
Mm.
And I think he's right in that idea. And so as I think
Is
about it, Mike,
is that why Pentecostalism is the fastest growing
it could be
version?
because
Is
they
it
have eyes
so
to see?
it's so eminent?
Yeah, because God is fully, there's this expectation that God is like present with us.
Right.
In the West, we're there's all this empty space and God's somewhere out there beyond the universe. But that's not the way the world is, right? God is fully present. I'm holding, you can't see me, but I'm holding my hand right to my face. God's right present with us now,
I've always preferred your face that way.
Here's the thing. I believe that God has planted daily millions of signs for him if we would only have eyes to see. And so your example of Epcot or the foods or Harry Potter, I think that these are glimpses of this deeper reality and these longings of the heart. So I think of it this way. So a philosopher named Peter Crave talks about how God has given us three prophets of the human soul. And these prophets are the longing for goodness, truth, and beauty. And each of these prophets has been given a guide. So reason is our guide on our quest toward truth, the human quest toward truth. Our conscience is our guide on the human quest toward goodness. And then the imagination is our guide on the human quest towards beauty. And then again, if we put our theology caps on, what is the source of goodness, truth, and beauty? Well, the source is Christ. And I love how St. Augustine, he said that of Jesus, he said, you are the beauty of all beautiful things and the good of all good things. And I would just add the truth to which all true things point. And so really, I think these signs are meant to, like you said, to awaken this longing, to set us on a journey. But because of disenchantment, we no longer see. And so what reenchantment, the hope of reenchanting is doing is that we would learn to see and enjoy the things around us as gift and then enjoy them in creaturely response. That's the idea of reenchanting. And that can happen for anything, right? So C.S. Lewis, which unlocked this for me in an essay that's not well known at all called Talking About Bicycles. Mm-hmm. He used the bicycle as this illustration of these four stages that pretty much we go through, that everybody goes through with respect to everything. And so he talks about how as a child you come into the world full of human gadgets and you're just unenchanted. But then he says, as a young child, you get that first bike and the training wheels come off and you enter the second stage. You're enchanted. Life is as it should be. Everything is, there's fullness of joy and effortless. And then he says pretty quickly, you get to that third stage, which is disenchantment. And with the bike, it becomes work. And he says it's like, rowing the oars in a galley slave, to the galley slave and the oars. It's just, it's work and it's disenchantment. And Lewis says that we pretty much, everyone stays in this third stage, but that we need to press through it. And so with respect to the bike, that we would learn to enjoy that bike as gift and then enjoy it in creaturely response. And I think that's pretty much what we should learn to do with just about everything, because it's all gifts.
The Jews in the first century had this wonderful practice where they would pray blessings. They would bless God for the most mundane things.
Yeah, that's right.
So, there was and I've read the blessing about if you use the bathroom. Thanks be to you, O King of heaven and earth, for holes in our bodies. I mean, and there was a sense, of course, that can become rote, mundane, and boring, but it was at least an attempt to receive every bit of human life as you say, as gift, and then the response should be thankfulness or worship or trust or obedience or whatever it is. Yep. And so part of the Cultural Apologetic Project seems to be this calling people back to a re-enchanted world. And doing that, you say we awaken desire. So like, is that art? Is that music? I mean, how do we partner with God to reawaken desire when many of us, feel kind of the death of desire in ourselves?
Yeah. Well, I think disenchantment has suppressed our desires, especially those deep-seated longings. And the deep-seated longings I'm thinking of are these deep-seated longings for truth, goodness, and beauty.
Where we've traded those for
superficial,
the superficial, the pleasure of an orgasm or of a meal or
That's
of
right.
a dopamine hit from social media.
That's right.
Okay.
Which are, of course, well, yeah, I mean, there's pleasure. Pleasure, of course, is something we own, right? It's the devil can't create any pleasure of their own, right? They just can steal from God and then misdirect it. But
screw tape letters.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. So,
I'm sorry.
You threw me off there.
I'm so sorry.
So your question was, so how do we awaken? So the idea that I try to unpack in the book is that we actually have 3 ways to join with God to awaken longing, because again, they're there, right? Think of that inverted triangle. They're part of what it means to be human.
Yeah.
And so I think that we do awaken longing through giving reasons for our faith, right? Because we long for truth. And so the tradition, what would maybe be understood as traditional apologetics, is vital to cultural apologetics. We've got to give arguments. We've got to give reasons. And of course, I think we can do that in a more creative way, but we've got to do that. The other ways, though, that we can join with God that are less developed, that I focus on equally as much in the book, are what I call the way of morality. And it's just simply asking this question: what is it that you want most deeply? And if you ask them, what is it that you want? Most people are going to say, I just want to be what? Happy, right? Okay. Well, what's interesting about that is we all want to be happy, but yet notice 2 things about it. None of us are, and yet, and we can't figure out how to get there on our own.
Right.
But I think that's instructive of, that helps us, because that sets us on a journey where we can ultimately find true happiness in God. And so we awaken this longing by just probing the texture of this longing for happiness or goodness. And actually, I unpack the longing for goodness as 3 sub-longings. We long to be whole, right? We don't want to be fragmented people.
Right.
We long for justice. We want to see things made right. And then the third thing is what you talked about with your Luke Skywalker thing at age 9. We long for significance, right? That's part of this longing for goodness. And so we can awaken those. And of course, notice, which gets to the third one, story, the imagination unpacks, especially, I resonated with your idea of Luke Skywalker staring out at the binary stars there, because he's longing for a life that matters. That's everybody's longing. So the third way that we join with God is to awaken longing is through the way of what I call imagination. And that's exactly like you said, it's using art and story and music and poetry and dance and beauty to awaken the longing for the actual source of beauty, which is Jesus Christ.
But the church has been so opposed to those things. And again, I'm generalizing.
Yeah.
But I would say in broad swaths, the church has been opposed to the use of art and beauty. Right? Church buildings are very sterile, and imagination is scary.
Yep.
Right? That's New Age or whatever it is.
Well, yeah, but so it's interesting. You're right. The beauty is in exile in the church, right? Everywhere else, our culture gets it. Our culture totally gets beauty. Yeah. In fact, I would say beauty is held captive to our culture, and it's used to fleece our wallets often, especially, the struggles that many men have with pornography, for example, or things like that. But even just, the constant push toward image. But we own beauty, right? And you're right. I can remember sitting in a church speaking, and it was one of these multi-purpose rooms with great walls. It's like, and I just made the comment, if we were sitting in a room that had, stone pillars, our experience, our embodied experience of this moment would be much different. And so, but because as evangelicals, or in general, I think in America, we tend to be very pragmatic. And so we're concerned with efficiency and bottom lines and, the metrics, the metrics of baptisms or gospel presentations, of course, which are aim for happiness, for enchantment, all of these things. And so, I'm encouraged that I see signs of life where Christians and churches are awakening to the importance of beauty in the life. But I think in many ways, number one, this is the most underutilized aspect of apologetics. But number two, in our day and age, given disenchantment, it could be one of the most strategic, is to awaken people's longings. I mean, you mentioned Harry Potter, through story. What is it about Harry Potter that you're drawn to? Well, I would argue you're drawn to those things that are part of the true story of the world, the gospel. And so these stories awaken within us this longing for the actual story that is the true story of the world, which is the gospel.
So let's say, and let's just talk very practically for a second.
Okay.
I want to talk to some people in our listening audience who are feeling disenchanted with it, and I'm sorry I keep coming back to this, but it's such a compelling picture to me.
Yeah,
they feel disenchanted within Christianity, right? They have the pieces of theological furniture set, but God just doesn't seem real. He feels absent. People are disillusioned. So how do we re-enchant the Christian faith from within it?
Yeah. Oh, big question.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, and I have thoughts, but no one's paying to hear my thoughts, Gouldy.
Well, let me give you 5 ideas then. How about that?
Perfect.
Okay. Number one is you've got to re-enter the world of the Bible on its own terms.
Oh, now hold on a second. What do you mean by that, Gouldy?
Well, what I mean is just, let's enter into the world of the Bible. And what you find there is this world full of deep drama and intrigue and toil and beauty, where God is passionately pursuing us, yet it's a world that's not tame, right? It's a world where we're vulnerable. We can't buffer ourselves from deity or from our own moral failures. And so enter into the Bible on its own terms, area of love and pursuit, who's way better than you think.
Say that
you get to know the world of the Bible.
Say that again.
Say that again.
Yeah, we come into the Bible on its own terms, and then you went into what that means, and we missed it.
Did I cut out? Oh, sorry about that.
No worries.
You find a world that is not tame. Number one, we can't buffer ourselves from deity. We can't buffer ourselves from the ravages of the world. Yet you find a good God who's active in the history of the world and in the lives of his people, and who lovingly pursues us. And so it's this greatest possible story, actually. And so enter into that story, and you will find partly reenchantment, because it's a story, because there's so many competing stories in our world, and they're all vying for our allegiance. I know you wrote a book on this, Mike, right?
Oh, no, hold on a second.
There you go. But all of these stories are inviting our participation. And so I would just ask yourself, is there a story that understands? And what you find is that the gospel story understands the deep longings of the heart. And we find life in there because we find the giver of life.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing I would say.
Okay.
Secondly, I would say, look for God actively working in your life and in the lives of those around you. So I've always been struck with Peter and John in Acts 3. They're walking to the temple. This guy is sitting, a cripple is sitting there and asks them for money. And Peter immediately stops, looks at him. They don't give him money, but he heals the man, because Peter was actively looking for God at work in his life and in the lives of those around him. But that's the kind of God that there actually is, right? God is an active God. And so begin to cultivate the habit of looking for him in our own lives. And so practically, what I ask my kids every day, and they get a little annoyed, is, how have you seen the fingerprint of God in your life today? And, they'll give answers like, well, I had fun in science class or something. And, as a parent, you're like, well, that's kind of a lame answer. But you know what? The hope is that eventually they'll ask that question at a deeper level and actually see that God is active in their lives and cares for them. Do you have something to say, or should I keep going?
No, dude, we're on number 2. You got 3 more.
Okay,
go.
3. I am a professor at heart. So here's a challenge. Read authors, and I'm thinking theology and philosophy, that hail from a more enchanted age, right? So 500 years ago, just about everybody viewed the world as a sacrament, as sacred, as enchanted. And so read Augustine or Athanasius or Boethius. If you don't know who these people are, look them up. I would say, why don't you start with Augustine's Confessions? Because you get all the juicy Hollywood tidbits of a kid that's into sex and beauty, but then he has this encounter with the divine and his life changes. So read Augustine's Confessions to see what people looked at the world like from a time when things were more enchanted.
Yeah.
Fourth, so this is, again, might sound provocative, but look to the artist in our own day and age that can help us see the world in its proper light. And so I think that artists today,
Pearl Jam, you're saying like Pearl Jam.
I mean, clearly Pearl Jam, and whatever else you listen to now. But artists help us see reality in its proper light. And in some ways they pull back, they pull back the curtain and they give us a glimpse of reality as it is. And so I'm thinking of artists I'm thinking of literature now, but you can expand this to other forms. People like Wendell Berry or Marilyn Robinson, or even C.S. Lewis or J.R. Tolkien. These are people that will help re-enchant the world. So, for example, Tolkien, he wrote a little essay called An Essay on Fairy Stories. And he said that there's a kind of escape that might be heroic into these secondary worlds of fiction. And he says they're heroic because this world is painful enough, right? And so if we can enter into stories and find consolation and recovery in them, in these secondary worlds of fiction, well, then we come back into the primary world when we put the book down or turn off your Netflix binge, if that works. But we find recovery. And so I would say, look for those authors or even shows or other forms of art, poetry, dance, music, and so on. And then, was that 4? So number 5, bring beauty back into your life. And so in everything that you do it with beauty in mind, whether it's making an omelet or a tweet or a PowerPoint or whatever, you're mowing your lawn, do it with beauty in mind. And I guess just learn to cultivate the habit of getting out in nature, or noticing the beauty of if you have kids, when you go take them to baseball, the beauty of a swing of a baseball bat, or if you go to a dance, the sublimity of a dance move or things like that. So if you cultivate beauty, the habit of looking for beauty around you, well, that'll help re-enchant your world. So how's that? Is that a good start?
That's a great start. And speaking of looking for beauty, I have a calendar out, and you can go on to mikeerre.calendar.org, and you'll particularly, I don't know if you're going to find
consolation in that it might not be heroic.
You need to particularly look at February. February is a really good month.
Is that the streaking month?
No, I just had to get one of those big Lexus car bows to kind of, so it's me and a bow, and that's all I'm going to say about it.
That's a great image. Thank you for that.
Ray, we're re-enchanting the world, baby. All right. So Gouldy, great work, man. I'm so proud of you. And really, the one thing, I like cultural apologetics. I like the term and I like the concept, but I was just a little bummed we didn't have kind of a more beautiful title. Just because, and that's why I wanted to have you on, was to explain this is a much richer, deeper, and I think a more compelling way to speak into the world about what Jesus is like than what a lot of us have kind of grown up hearing and doing. And so it's called Cultural Apologetics. Paul Gould, Gould. And then you're the founder of something called the Two Tasks Institute. Tell us just a bit about that and where people can find you online.
Yeah, so the Two Tasks Institute.org. You can find that online if you Google it. And that's a group of friends and I have got together, and basically we're just asking this question: how can we show Christianity reasonable? That's task number 1. Of course, super important. But then how can we show Christianity desirable as well? that it's both true to the way the world is and true to the way the world ought to be. And so I would encourage you to like us on Facebook or follow us on social media, Twitter, Instagram. We have a podcast that we have. Season 1 has already been released. It's on cultural apologetics. And actually there'll be a book coming out, a little primer on cultural apologetics that is a transcript that's been edited from season 1 that'll come out in another month or so.
Does that count as book 3?
Courtney, my co-host, and I did it together, so it's an edit co-authored. We'll call it.
All right.
And then so there's a season 2 is going to drop later this month. It's on the virtues and the vices in a disenchanted world.
Whoa!
But we've got videos that are being produced, and we've got materials, and we've got study guides if you want to have your small groups think and wrestle with this question of how do we re-enchant ourselves and work with God to re-enchant the world. We've got resources that will be rolling out on the next weeks to come. So
nice.
Check us out at twotasks.org.
Awesome.
Twotasksinstitute.org. Sorry.
Twotasksinstitute.org. Paul freaking Gould. Oh, so fun, dude. And so Voxers, thank you for tuning in. As always, grateful for you. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord shine his face upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance to you. And in these days, may he give us peace. Thank you, friends. Till next time.